Welcome to CorVex, the plugin for easy game level layout. In this video we are going to explore some of the features added in CorVex 1.3, including the new wall mode and enhanced UV controls. To access CorVex, you'll go to the Create tab in the command panel and choose Wallworm from the list. Now you'll have an option that says CorVex. You click CorVex, you have to add the CorVex node to the scene. By default, it's just a cube that has no mapping. You need to add splines to it to control the shape of this object. By default, it will be considered a block, which is the default and only mode in previous version of CorVex. Now we have an option called wall. We're going to start with our original block mode to begin with. We're going to add a new spline to this object. When you do this, we're going to turn on snapping here, and we're going to snap just to the grid. We're going to create the base shape of this object, and we're going to use just like that. We're going to go back to our CorVex object here and go back up to the general parameters, and you'll see here that we have this option called wall. Now here are the difference between block and wall. Block will just be one solid object per spline in the list. If you change it to wall, it will actually be several objects where each subspline of the spline will become a single block that's a convex shape that is a wall. If I turn on edge mode, you'll see how the wall pieces join at the corners. We can now change the width of our wall if we'd like, in the positive or negative directions. And this wall will export into the game engine correctly. Now the UV controls have been updated to accommodate wall mode and the material IDs. I'm going to unlock all of these IDs here and show you that there's two new material ID channels added for wall mode for the visible ends, which would be this end here and this end. For the wall side too, and that would be one side of the wall here or the other side of the wall here. By default, it will use mapping ID 1 for both of those to match the default material ID of the whole wall. We also have some new utilities down here, and I'm going to use this one that says create multi-material. I'm going to create a multi-material for this object. And it, by default, will assign a material. We're going to bring out the material editor here, and we're going to select this object's material that was just generated. You'll see in the material editor that it created a multi-material with some names of these materials here. Let's double click this and you'll see it lists these. Now what we're going to do is to demonstrate how this works is I'm going to add some maps to the materials that were created here just so you can see how it looks. Add this to the diffuse slot, and we're going to add this checker field to the top and to the bottom and top. Now here's our wall, and it has planar mapping on all the sides. At this point, we're going to explore a couple of the new options and controls for the UVWs of this object. First, we're going to change the wall top method. Notice the shape and angle of the tops of the walls, the checkers. We're going to tell it to go from the sides. At this point, you'll notice that they all follow the outer edge. If we want to change if we would like to change the scale of these, we can change this to not use the sides UVs, and we're going to use a new scale for just the tops and bottoms. You can drag this up or down. So if I want this to tile more in those directions. And I can offset these as well. I can change this to go something like this. And now you'll see that it is offset in all of those. I can also move them in the U direction and they will all flow correctly. But if I want to go back to using the same UV as the sides, I can change this back to this option. Now notice in the wall mode, the tiling is correct between the different segments of the wall. So if I go and change the offset of my U, you'll see that between the different wall pieces, from here to here, it flows correctly. And in the ends, it will also flow. So this makes creating walls with textures that tile correctly a lot easier to create, and it takes a lot less effort to get them to align correctly. Again, let's go back down to our material IDs. We can change what material is used in the different parts of them by just switching out these sliders. So let's say I want my ends to be the same as the tops. I see it says top ID 3 here. I can just change this to 3. And you'll see that it has the same material as the top does. I'm going to show you how easy it is for us to extend this. And we're going to go here to our spline bases. If I right click spline bases, I'm going to go back to my original spline, so I'm still working on the same spline. I'm going to create new lines here. Again, I'm going to keep this at snap to grid. It's as easy as just adding your points onto the scene to create your walls. And in this case, we could just make some kind of maze-like environment fairly quickly. And these will all be convex pieces that will export into the game engine correctly. And now again, because these are all part of the CorVex objects, I can easily change the mapping flow amongst all these pieces. And finally, I'm going to show you how to integrate both blocks and walls with using the same splines to create certain kinds of effects. We're going to create a new CorVex, and we're going to make this one be a wall. And I want it to have the same settings as this one, but I don't want to use the splines of it. So I'm going to go down to the utilities, and I'm going to set get settings from CorVex. If I click that, I can pick a CorVex in the scene, so this object now has that object's settings. I'm then going to go back to my object and add a new spline here. And you see it's purple, and that's because I haven't applied the material from it yet. So to do that, I'm just going to take the material I already had and bring it into this object. Now I have this closed-in wall here, and say I wanted a floor to match this. I can create a new CorVex object, and I'm going to tell it to use the same splines, existing spline, as this object. And now it's going to fit the base of that spline there. I want this one to have a negative height, a negative, and now it matches. Now notice this one, this wall goes outside instead of in. I have two options to change this. The first option is just to go to this wall, and I can change the width to a negative number. And that will make it match. I could also keep that a positive number and go back to the spline itself, change to spline mode, select the spline, and reverse the direction of the spline. The direction of the splines, that means the ordering of the vertices, determines what side of a spline a wall will go, if it's positive and or negative. Now because both this wall and this block are using the same spline, I can actually go into this spline and change where the vertices is, and it will adjust both the wall and the underlying block at the same time to match. So this one vertex now will control this, all the vertices of this spline. So I don't have to go and edit both of these walls. If I want to make a change, I just move this spline around. And because this spline is controlling both of these, if I add any new subsplines inside of here, it will add a block and a wall at the same time. And again, because this spline is in a clockwise, because the ordering is a certain way, that will be on the outside. So again, the same principle applies of the ordering if I want to reverse those. But again, if I just want to keep on adding vertices here, I just create new lines to this, and it is again controlling those. So if I added other CorVex objects into the scene, I could have them use these same splines as well. There are other features in CorVex which have not been covered here, but this should give you an idea of how to use the wall mode and block mode together. This is Sean Olson. I'm the developer of the Wallworm tools, including CorVex. You can always get the latest versions of Wallworm and various Wallworm plugins at wallworm.com. Thank you, and have a good day.